Aurora 7, Discovering a New Favorite Author. Part 1, Some History. I discovered Thomas Mallon to some degree on my own. Browsing the aisles of Barnes & Noble, intent on finding a new author, I happened upon his novel, Watergate. At the time, I felt that I should extend my library beyond the same few authors I had read. I felt that my reading habits had hit a point of stagnation. I also had grown tired of rereading the books in my collection. As such, I went on one of my interval searches of the bookstore, paying specific attention to the tables designated as new or noteworthy. This search and choosing books at random had led me to both extremes of the quality slide, although these books tended to remain in the middle. Arguing the quality of books and other forms of media requires a different discussion, and my thoughts on the matter reach deep into all manners of tangents. For the sake of this essay, understand that my views on average and mediocre might differ from someone else. Also understand that I may enjoy something while acknowledging that the something may lack in quality. The inverse of these also applies. I may have a large body of favorite, while acknowledging that an individual limb of that body may falter. I mention this aside to preface my complicated relationship with material I enjoy and in which I partake. To illustrate this point, my mom once asked me what I considered my favorite Ray Bradbury book. I answered with Something Wicked This Way Comes. My mom, surprised, asked what made Something Wicked Bradbury's best book. At this point, I had to correct my mom by saying that I ranked Dandelion Wine as Bradbury's best book. I just happened to enjoy Something Wicked more. I hate to admit it, but the title of Thomas Mallon's book caught my attention. As the tired old adage goes, you should not judge a book by its cover. This should apply somewhat to titles. Think of titles and covers as part of the marketing to hook the attention of willing customers. But, at the time, my interest favored the historic, and through sarcastic curiosity, I had read a few nonfiction books about Richard Nixon. Mallon's Watergate seemed a good way for me to reach two destinations by the same road. I read and enjoyed the book. I enjoyed it enough that I took the conscious action to search out more of his work. After the first book, I wanted to read more, but I did not consider myself a budding fan of his work. A curiousness of whether Thomas Mallon's books could demonstrate enough consistency inspired my want. I did not look for the best. I looked for a peg of adequate shape to plug a hole. I purchased Aurora 7 as the next book. At the time, I had no personal connection to the Aurora 7 flight. The extent of my knowledge regarding Scott Carpenter started and ended with his name, which I had probably heard from my dad when he had read The Right Stuff by Thomas Wolfe. However, at the time, I flirted with the idea of writing a novel or novella that featured space travel from the perspective of a layman on the ground. With this bit of footing, a novel about Scott Carpenter's flight caught my interest from among Mallon's selection of historically based fiction. I considered that maybe something in the novel, such as the blending of the real with the unreal, could inspire some of my writing. I read and I enjoyed the book, but I did not just enjoy it. I loved the book. To me, the book demonstrated synergy. Although I found each separate part of the book enjoyable, or at least not objectionable, I recognized the totality of the work exceeded the separate parts. I have read good books that pissed me off. I have read terrible stories told well. I have read good stories told poorly. I have also read books that fail across all factors. Aurora 7, though, lifted me, maybe like Scott Carpenter's rocket following an orbit, previewing a world of satisfaction, rather than one of the Apollo rockets trying for the moon. Part 2. The Review. Mallon's prose, his way with words, although more maximalist than my preference, worked. In Aurora 7, he demonstrates a mastery over words and the formulating of images from those words. He tends to use simple sentence construction and simple sensual details to lead into a bigger or deeper emotional reaction. Nearly every paragraph, if not every line, bubbles with emotion. This gives me enough reason to forgive the matters I do not like. As I said, my personal writing tends towards the minimalist. I prefer the author leaving emotions and motivations to the analysis of the reader. I prefer he crumbled to his knees over he crumpled to his knees and felt sad. That said, I can overlook my preference if the writer writes well. Although Mallon does not write the way I would hypothetically prefer, by which I mean the way I would write, I respect and admire his craft. He has a style, and he knows that style. The plot of the novel rolls in a rather straightforward manner. It begins at T-minus 8 hours and 45 minutes with regards to the Aurora 7 flight, and ends after Scott Carpenter's splashdown. Flashbacks emerge a few times to provide background information, but the overall narrative progress moves forward. Of course, simplistic narrative progression does not betray the complexity of the book. The novel focuses on Gregory Noonan, a wide-eyed child with space on the brain, and the continuing conflict revolves around the lack of understanding between Gregory and his father. The book follows Gregory skipping school, sneaking to New York City, and losing his way in Grand Central Station. Mallon frames this narrative with the mostly historic, partly dramatized path Scott Carpenter took around the Earth. Scenes jump from Carpenter's cockpit, snapping photos, to Gregory Noonan doing the things awkward children do. He carries the emotional center of the story, and, when all conflicts converge, they converge on him. I like that Scott Carpenter does not take the mantle of protagonist. I imagine balancing history and fiction within historic fiction requires a deft hand. Watergate focused on historic individuals. That novel did have a share of fictional characters experiencing the historic events, which helps the reader who may not have experienced the events to garner a somewhat personal understanding. My other main source of historic fiction, Umberto Eco novels, portray history almost as context to the fiction. The plot happens while events unfold in the larger world. With the novel of Aurora 7 centering on Gregory, the reader enters the story and can understand how people at the time viewed this historic event. The reader can understand Gregory, we can understand his thoughts. The potential reader might assume that Scott Carpenter, or a member of Mission Control, would tell at least the breadth of a novel about the Aurora 7 flight. The potential reader might not consider the benefits of viewing the flight through the eyes of a school-aged child. For more simple complexity, the narrative drifts not just between Gregory and Scott Carpenter, but to a wide cast of characters. Some of these characters hold the spotlight for a few paragraphs, but each of them enhance the story. The reader may want to know more about a certain character and end up disappointed that the character does not reappear. This constitutes a common problem with having interesting characters. Either way, the novel needs these characters. None of them feel like they bloat the novel, and their removal would take away something important. We also get a sense of what I will call for the time contemporary history. We, as a race of people, tend to view the past through a modern lens. When Aeneas's deceased father showed him the future of Rome, he did so within the frame that the people of Rome, the audience for the Aeneid, would view Aeneas's future as their past. After all, the passage of time makes history. The people at the time Aurora 7 takes place, as reinforced by the narrative, may not have viewed Scott Carpenter's flight as historic before or during its course. We, however, know the outcome, even if we may not know all the details of the Aurora 7 flight. We at least know it happened back then. I felt and feel this way when I read and reread those Umberto Eco novels. However, Mallon's Aurora 7 manages to bridge a gap. Although the novel takes place back then, it feels like it occurs right now. The use of present tense might help this. If I were to explain this book in the style of those grade school book reports, I would declare, stammering through my grade school shyness, Gregory Noonan the main character, even though other characters, Scott Carpenter including, take up large portions of the novel. I would talk about the relationship between the father and son, and I would say it ends with a happy ending. When James Cameron's Titanic received Titanic applause, I used to joke that audiences already know the ending. If you already know the ending, how can you enjoy the film? At that age, I saw the top of the iceberg and not the hulking mass under the water. I saw storytelling as the relating of events and not the depths and subtleties implied by those events. Knowing the details of the Aurora 7 flight does not detract from the novel. You may know Scott Carpenter survives his problems, which arise from the overusage of fuel. You may know he makes a successful splashdown, albeit improvised and off target. But knowing this does not detract from the narrative Mallon employs around Scott Carpenter as a character and the rest of the cast. Overall, I rate Aurora 7 as a solid novel. I may hesitate to call it the greatest or even great, but it stands tall. I recommend it to everyone, including my friends who hesitate exploring literary fiction. Part 3. Favoritism. This leads me to the concept of favorites. I feel when it comes to criticism, critics often rely on hyperboles. They declare something as the best thing ever or the worst thing ever. They nitpick the flaws of material they dislike while forgiving those same flaws in the material they like. It seems that everything needs to occupy one of two extremes. Either you like it and consider it great, or you dislike it and consider it utter garbage. The reasoning holds. If you enjoy something, it must be good because you can't be wrong with your emotions. If you dislike something, it must be bad because you can't be wrong with your emotions. As such, some may find it difficult to understand why I would consider a solid novel to be one of my current favorites. Thinking in terms of good or bad, like or dislike, and love it or hate it limits us. We should consider works as a whole and as parts. We should consider what we like and why we like it, rather than relying on the tautology that it is good because I like it. Asterisks and footnotes decorate my definition of favorite. I consider criteria other than whether I enjoyed it or not, and the weight of each criteria varies from instance to instance. When I read that first novel from Thomas Mallon, Watergate, I decided to try some of his other works because I had a theory. I thought that I found a writer with a consistent prose whom I could enjoy. I moved on to the second novel, not at a sprint, but at a leisurely stroll. Upon reading Aurora 7, I confirmed my theory. I had found an author whom I could enjoy. A high probability exists that I would enjoy his other works if and when I picked them up. I think the confirmation of this theory pushed my opinion beyond just viewing these two novels as a couple novels I happened to read because I needed something to read. I enjoyed Watergate and I loved Aurora 7, but that love fills one criterion. The other criteria, which I admit I have a hard time articulating, dictate my favorites. I did not know that when I roamed the bookstore that I had found an author whose other works I would seek and read and analyze. I did not know I found a novel that I would respect and that would lead me to other novels that I would subsequently respect. But discoveries work that way. Experiments work that way. Sometimes favorable results occur, sometimes, or more often, unfavorable results happen. This time, sad little me, stuck in and failing at life, had discovered a new favorite. At the time I enjoyed, and to this day I enjoy. This time, sad little me, stuck in and failing at life, had discovered a new favorite. At the time I enjoyed, and to this day I enjoy all the benefits of having a new favorite. This has been Bennett Durkin, and this has been an essay from my library.